Indie Beacon Radio with host B Alan Bourgeois. Welcome to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. You can send questions for each show on Twitter using the hashtag IndieBeacon. Now sit back and enjoy learning about our guest for this show.
Hi, welcome to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois, and I have with me Dan Logan, who has written several books. Welcome, Dan.
Well, welcome. I'm glad to be here.
Well, great. So let's start off with the most basic question. What got you into writing?
I thought about that, and I have to go all the way back to an English composition course in high school. The teacher was a spry lady, and she told us one time to write a story, a short story. And I got into that, and it was very fascinating to me to be able to make up characters, make them do what you wanted them to do, and develop a plot. Kind of interesting that the protagonist's name was Dan. Well, I don't know why I would have picked that name, but it was something that was fun to do. Today, when I look back on that story, and I still have it, the plot was good, and I might write a short story about it. There were a number of technical issues with the writing, however, that I've since learned how to correct.
Now, speaking of short stories, I mean, you've got 7 short stories and 5 books.
Right.
And so, I mean, you definitely can write. There's no doubt about that. But you seem to enjoy science fiction. Is that because of where you went to college, or is there something else there?
A little bit of both. When I was probably about 12 to 14 in that age, I was fascinated with science fiction. People like Isaac Asimov and Heinlein and Arthur C. Clarke. I enjoyed reading their novels. Then I went to school at Purdue, and of course, it's known as the cradle of the astronauts. That's where Neil Armstrong went, the first man on the moon. And I started out in aeronautical engineering. I've always had a fascination for aviation. So that science fiction has kind of all stayed with me all through my life.
Now, would you consider science fiction in the same fantastic travel aspect as time travel, which you write about?
Yes. One thing I tell people is I write science fiction. I don't write sci-fi. There's no little green men in my stories. They're very realistic. I live in Houston. That's America's space city, and I go to the Johnson Space Center quite often. I've had the good fortune to interact with several of the people at the executive level of NASA. So I try to write stories that might happen if you walked out the door and they would start the next week. I don't write sci-fi. I try to say that I put the science back in science fiction.
So let's jump right into the fact that you do have the 2 sci-fi books, and the most recent one, the Deimos Incident. Because you are in Houston, you have access to a lot of science and space travel knowledge. I mean, it's amazing how much knowledge is in Houston. I used to live there. As far as the space industry is concerned. So you were able to use that to a great extent about research and things of that nature?
Yes, I was. I teach, or I present a workshop at a local college about writing, and another of the instructors there happens to be a retired NASA employee who retired as the director of astronaut training. His name is Frank Hughes. There isn't anything about NASA that he doesn't know. And I've been able to talk with him, and he actually wrote the foreword for my previous book, the Phobos Expedition. And he's given me tips on the science involved with space travel and so forth. So yes, being in Houston really does help write science fiction.
So let's find out, what is the story, the Deimos Incident, all about?
The Deimos Incident is about a catastrophe that originates on the Martian moon Deimos. It puts a space travel crew at great jeopardy. Deimos is, and I may as well mention the name, Mars was originally called Ares. That the Greeks named it Ares. And then they named the 2 satellites, Phobos and Deimos, after the sons of Ares. That's where the names come from. Phobos and Deimos, roughly translated, mean fear and terror. And there's probably a good reason for that. When the Romans came along, they changed everything to Mars, to their own language. But they retain the names of Phobos and Deimos. And so the space travel to Deimos is fraught with concerns about what might happen.
So I'm curious, because it deals with Mars to some extent. Did this come along because of the talk about Mars, or was this something that was previously thought of?
I think it was because of its current interest. I think people are interested in travel to Mars right now. We've learned a lot about it, and we're talking about perhaps in 10 or 15 years an actual trip to Mars. So that was my trigger, my inspiration for writing a story about Mars. The 3-book series, and I'm writing the final book in the Martian Travel series, actually is about going to Mars and landing on Mars. In the 3rd book coming up, there will be an attempted Martian landing.
So there is a lot of interest about Mars, as you mentioned, and there are a lot of people who have written books about it or are writing books about the travel to it and stuff. What are you doing to separate yourself from everybody else?
I'm trying to, first of all, be very realistic. I'm trying to write a story that could happen and would happen, in the near-term future. I would say that when we get to Mars, they're not going to be little green men. It'll be very factual, but it'll be very entertaining about what is found there.
It will be interesting to see what is actually there and stuff. You mentioned you are in the process of writing your 3rd book. Do you have a time frame when that might be ready?
I hope to publish it late this year, 2020. And the working title is The Martian Enigma. The crew actually lands on Mars, and they encounter an enigma, a puzzle that's really, once they are able to solve it, changes our concept about what the universe is all about.
Now, the Deimos just came out within the last couple months, correct?
Yes, that's correct. It came out, I think, in November.
So do you try to have one every year, a book, whether it's part of a series or not, at least once a year?
I would like to. I have found that typically my experience is from the idea to the publication takes about 2 years for me. Try to write faster, but to do it in a year is a good goal, but it's hard to meet.
Well, you're doing fine with every 2 years. From the publishing world's perspective, every 2 years is good for publishing and stuff. So you're okay. Don't rush it. The fact that you have been, written those stories and the time travel, and you have that knowledge there, what is the most fascinating thing you learned through this process about science or any of that aspect?
One of the things that I've learned, and it's kind of eerie, I've written about a number of things that basically I have found later to have come true. One of the examples I'll give you is in the Deimos incident, in the story, the spacecraft is launched from the space station, International Space Station, not from the Earth, but it is propelled, or the propulsion system is augmented by a photon sail. It's actually a sail that captures emissions from the sun, and the force is very weak, but over a long period of time, it accelerates the spacecraft to a very high speed. After I wrote that, I happened on the fact that NASA has already developed such a sail. I didn't know it at the time, but it was there. And I've found in my writing, it's uncanny the number of instances that kind of thing will occur.
Well, they say great minds think alike. So we've talked a lot about the last two, the one that just came out, Deimos, and the one that is coming out, but we haven't discussed the first part of the series. Anything you want to share with that?
About the Phobos expedition, or about the time travel series?
The first in the Mars series.
The Phobos expedition, it's been rumored for a long time, or suspected for a long time, that the tiny moon Phobos, it's only 12 miles in diameter, the tiny moon Phobos might be extraterrestrial. It might be an artificial satellite that was launched there by a once-time civilization on Mars. And so the NASA mission to Phobos is to determine whether or not that satellite is extraterrestrial or not. What they find out is even more fascinating than if it were to be extraterrestrial.
Cool. Well, this is a really good time for us to stop with this session, and we'll get into your time travel issues in the next section. So
Okay.
let our sponsors do their thing. We'll be right back.
Well, hello there, my friends. My name is Randy James, independent voiceover producer in the Dallas, Texas area, available to write and record a 30-second commercial, much like the one you're hearing right now. It's a great way to help increase awareness and exposure to your book title. It's easy to do. Simply call me and we'll brainstorm on a few ideas, and in a few hours, I'll whip something up and send you a digital file ready to use. Remember, call or text me, Randy James, at 214-762-1942.
What would you do if you had to put your life on hold to care for a loved one? I'm Charlotte Canyon, award-winning author of the book, You Have to Laugh to Keep from Crying, How to Parent Your Parents. That was a question I had to ask myself some 16 years ago, and you'll have to ask the same question. I had a father-in-law with dementia, a mother with Alzheimer's, and a dad with Parkinson, all at the same time.
We Fiction is a fun, fast-paced writing contest for any author team to create a book based on what readers submit for plot, characters, locations, and even plot twists. Learn more about this unique contest at wefiction.dearindy.org. The 5th annual Authors Marketing Event is coming to Granbury, Texas, July 24th through the 27th. Join us and learn from the professionals how to properly market and sell yourself and your books. Go to ame.authorsmarketingguild.com for all the details. That's ame.authorsmarketingguild.com.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois, and I am talking to Dan Logan, who's written books about Mars travel, space travel. He has a series. The Deimos Incident is the current one. We talked in great detail about all 3 of the books in the first section. Now we're going to talk about his other collection of stories that are time travel, Ancient Secrets of Time Travel series. That's an interesting aspect. You have 3 books in that respect as Ancient Time Travel Secrets. What does that really mean?
Well, my interests are aviation and the Southwest, and the advice that you give to writers is to write about what you know, and I know about those 2 things. So I said, it's interesting that UFOs are always around incidents of major occurrences like nuclear tests and so forth. And I said, what if they indeed were time travelers? What if UFOs were not aliens, but they were time travelers from Earth? And I said, now to add a little twist to it, rather than being from the future, what if they were time travelers that came forward from the past? And so that's the premise for all 3 of these books. There is an ancient civilization a long time ago in our past that had developed time travel capability, but is no longer, there's no evidence that it ever existed now, which was the premise. And each book takes a little bit different look at that possibility.
So that's interesting. You're saying that for us, current 2020, people from the past come to our time frame. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Right?
That's correct.
So what would be the value of, I mean, are they coming to the future to take stuff back, or are they coming to give us a hint as to, hey, you don't want to go down this road because we've been there?
Their civilization is endangered. The Earth goes through some pretty dramatic changes through its lifetime, like the poles reverse, and there's a wobble that causes oceans to flood and different kinds of things. They know from their time travel themselves that they're facing one of these big problems. So they come to us and they're really trying to go farther into the future, but they don't have the fuel to get that far. So they mix among us and hope to develop that capability to produce that fuel here.
Interesting. So, out of curiosity, how much of this came from the knowledge that you got from the people in the Houston area and your scientist friends?
I'll have to think about that. I think that time travel is more of my imagination than living in Houston. I'm from Indiana originally. We moved back to Houston about 6 years ago, and most of the time travel work was while I was a Hoosier, while I lived in Indiana. So I would say it's more my own thoughts and imagination than doing work with NASA.
So you have 3 books. The Lost Portal is the middle one, the first Migration and the Spirit Gate. Interesting about the Spirit Gate, I'm assuming because of the title that it is spiritually related. Is that correct?
To some extent. The Spirit Gate is about a planetary alignment that occurs. We know it today as the Gate of the Sun, or Man's Gate, or whatever. And many of the famous structures in ancient civilizations, like the Mayas and so forth, recognize where these gates are. If you look at I don't want to get too technical, but if you look at the ecliptic and how it aligns with the constellations, you can actually see these gates today. So they exist. And what the ancient people believed was that that the human spirit came in through the gate of man, lived on earth a while, and then went back up and became gods by going through the gate of God. So that's the spirituality of the story.
Okay. Now, you've also written short stories. You have 7 of them. What is the motivation for writing those versus actually writing a novel?
You get an idea, and a novel is a long-term project, of course. As I said, it takes about 2 years. The short story is much shorter, and you can take a premise and develop it very quickly. I like to do something that has a little bit of a twist in it, something that's unusual and that will trigger somebody's curiosity. For example, the first one I wrote is my wife's favorite. It's called Across the Divide. It's about a couple that go across the Continental Divide in Colorado, and they end up in the supernatural. In other words, there's something there that they drive into the supernatural. My wife and I have actually traveled that road and gone across that divide, but we made it okay. We didn't end up in the supernatural.
I enjoy writing short stories myself, so I'm curious. I find that putting them together in a collection kind of like tells a separate story on top of the short stories. Do you find that to be your case as well, or is it just totally separate and just random?
I think there's a common theme, in other words, that I like there to be some intrigue and a twist there that maybe the reader isn't suspecting. But my stories are all, I would say that they're a variety of topics. The story is about a little boy that detested his piano lessons because the way that his older piano teacher taught him was very persnickety and very precise. And he went one day, and there was a young woman that met him at the door and said that the older woman had called on her because she was amused and she could help this Tyler learn. And she taught him to play by ear. And he was really tickled with that. He enjoyed doing that and wanted to repeat it. And when he looked around on the piano bench, sitting next to him was not the young woman, but it was the older woman who called up the muse inside her to help him.
Interesting. So you've got the book that you're currently writing. You've had those short stories. What other books are you writing on?
Well, I'm working on the Martian Enigma now, which is the concluding story in the Space Travel to Mars series. I've got several ideas in my head one of the things I try to tell people in a workshop about writing is you're always writing something. You write while you write. If you get stuck on a novel, you write a short story, or you write an essay, or you write a letter to the editor. You need to write all the time.
And that's very true, because it's frustrating for the writer if they're not writing, getting it out of their system, it clogs up. So I'm going to ask you this question, which a lot of our authors do say, The characters you write about, do they talk to you and say, I wouldn't do this, I would do that instead, or give you hints as to what they want to do?
I think it's very fascinating. When I started writing, I retired shortly after that, and my wife had to get used to having me around the house. Worse than that, she found out that with writing, she had to have my characters live in the house with us, and there are a bunch of them. So the fortunate thing is she is excellent at being able to comment about my characters and how they act and so forth. So she would always wonder when we were sitting down at dinner whether she was sitting down with me or whether she was sitting down with Darren or she was sitting down with Michael or whomever. Who was it that day that I was?
I'm sure that adds to some interesting conversations.
Yes, it did.
But I'm going to throw this out there, and it really doesn't relate to the writing, but have you ever used one of your characters as an excuse as to why you did something she was not happy with?
No, I would never do that.
That's good.
I've never done that.
Well, we are at that point where we need to stop and take a break for our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
I'm Rox Berkey.
And I'm Charles Brakefield. We're award-winning co-authors, Brakefield and Berkey, of the Enigma book series. There are 10 books in the series, with book number 11 planned for release in January 2020.
Each story has a central technology focus ranging from identity theft to cryptocurrency and now AI wars. These adult techno thrillers pit cyber good guys against cyber thugs across the darknet.
In our world, technology is today's weapon of choice. You can enjoy ebook format, paper, or Audible. We want your feedback.
Until the next story, thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you for watching or listening to Indie Beacon Radio. Our sponsor, IndieLector.store, is the only bookstore that pays authors their fair share for book sales. Help authors to succeed and enjoy a great book by supporting them at IndieLector.store. Enjoy a 10% discount with coupon code SHOPPER20 at IndieLector.store. Coupon valid until December 31st, 2020. That's IndieLector.store, coupon code SHOPPER20.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. Don't forget to like us, follow us, or subscribe to one of our many channels. Now, here is your host for today's show.
Welcome back to Indie Beacon Radio. This is your host, B Alan Bourgeois. We've been talking with Daniel Logan, who's had written several short stories, plus a series on time travel, and also he's working on his third book in the series of Mars and space travel. Dan, how can people learn about you? Do you have social media, a website?
Yes, I have a website. It's DanielLoganAuthor.com. I'm on social media, and on Amazon I have an author's page. So there are several ways they can to learn more about me.
Okay, what is your website?
DanielLoganAuthor.com.
Okay, and for Facebook or Twitter, how can they find you?
On Facebook, it would be Daniel J. Logan with a period after J. And on Amazon, if you look up, the best thing to do is look up the Deimos incident, DEIMOS incident, and my name will be listed as an author of that book. And you click on my name, you'll go to my author page.
Great. And on your website, do you have a section where people can find out where you're at, what when you're going to be doing signings and stuff like that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We have just a couple minutes left. So with that, I always ask our authors, what words of advice do you have for someone who wants to get into either sci-fi writing or any type of writing at all?
If you get into writing, the advice I would give is to be persistent. You just have to keep at it. There'll be lots of obstacles that you'll find that you face, and it's easy to let them defeat you. But if you stay persistent, you'll overcome that. The other thing I would say is you need to be able to overcome rejection. It's a real moment of truth when you put out something that you've written, and you wait to see what the reviews are or what the response is. So I always say that an author is a writer that's overcome rejection and been able to deal with it. And the final thing I would say is write about what you know. It's easier than writing about what you don't know.
Sounds great. Well, I thank you very much for your time, and I wish you the best of success, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you for listening to Indie Beacon Radio, where creative souls can find help in marketing their creations. To learn more about Indie Beacon services, to be a guest on the show, or to advertise on our show, please visit our website.
Indie Beacon Radio with the host, B Alan Bourgeois.
Indie Beacon Radio is produced by B Alan Bourgeois for Authors Marketing Guild LLC, copyright 2020. Voiceover by Randy James, Lydia Bello, and B Alan Bourgeois. To be a sponsor of the show or for more information, please email us at info@authorsmarketingguild.com. To be interviewed for the show, please complete the form at radio.authorsmarketingguild.com. Music Always Rejoice by Ramcord